We have ceremonies which, ancient ceremonies, they go back 300 years or so, haven't changed terribly much in that time, and they take people in, they allow people to reflect on themselves, on their behaviour, on their place in society, on those who are less well off than themselves, and what we can do to actually help those people. On an evening basis, we would usually meet in a lodge, a group of people, maybe 20 to 30 people, and we would do a ceremony first, and then we go to dinner together afterwards. And we might do that between 4 and 8 times a year.
I have to say, and I joked with you when you sat down, you're far younger than I thought you were going to be. You're not wearing a cape, or you have a twirly moustache, or a sinister hat, or anything like that. You present yourself as a very, very young man. I have to ask you, what attracted you to becoming a Mason? Are your family in it? What did you see?
So no, my immediate family aren't in it. I think my uncle was a Freemason, but I was very, very young when he died, so I don't think we ever spoke about it. I joined on a whim, really. I was 18 years old, or 18 or 19. I was at university. I was in a student house.
I thought it was all blokes in their 60s did when they drove the Jaguar down to the lodge to make a few quid. I think you got them as well, I'm sure.
I think one of the things is, one of the things I'm here to do is bust some of these myths. And no, we have people from 18 to 108, I think is our oldest Mason.
Right?
But no, I joined on a whim. I didn't know terribly much about Freemasonry. A friend of mine in my student house was a Freemason, and he said, would you like to come and join? So I did, and it got under my skin, and I've had 22 years of enormous fun ever since.
Well, congratulations to you, and I'm sure you raised a heck of a lot of money. But here come some of the questions I have to put to you. If it's all so sweetness and light, why do you need secret passwords?
Well, again, this is something that's quite reported an awful lot, but I think it's misunderstood. So we have things...
And I have to say, I have no person, because I'm not a Mason, there's no one in my family, so I've gone to the most dreaded source, which is, of course, the internet, which I know is appalled, and I apologise, but I have no other touchstone to do it, because I don't know any Masons, so I am told you have secret passwords. Is that true?
So it is true, and it's part of our ceremony. So we have passwords, we have the grip or token, or the famous handshake, but these date back as part of a ceremony of identification.
You don't have that in the WI, Doctor.
Let me explain why we have them. They date back from the time when we base ourselves on medieval stonemasons who used to build cathedrals, because the whole sort of point of our ceremonies, we take building a big building, King Solomon's Temple in this case, as an allegory or an example of building ourselves into better people. And we have these tokens dating back from the time when people didn't have CVs, they were illiterate, and Masons would have to prove what they knew of their craft of masonry. So if you were a junior Mason, you had one password. If you were a more senior one, you had a different password. And all we do is we copy that in our ceremonies. It's purely used in our ceremonies. In 22 years as working in the NHS, first as a junior doctor, then later as a consultant, and finally as a clinical director for medicine, nobody has ever given me a Masonic handshake outside of a lodge room. And I would meet 40, 50, 60 new people every week. Well, every day sometimes.
Right, okay, that's interesting. We talked about Masons earlier in the week, and a number phoned up, and I have to say they all talked about the money. But then when I said, can you explain what your secret word, is it Tubal-Cain or Tubal-Cain means, they declined to tell me. Why would that be?
Well, this is because Masonry...
Have I pronounced it right, by the way?
You have. This is because this is because it's...
Doctor, you can't say the word.
Well, I'm not going to say it, no, because you see, the trouble is...
You're a doctor, you're an incredibly bright, well-educated man. And you're saying you can't say a word.
But these words are all on the internet. You know, your listeners can go now, because it's about integrity, and because I promised that I wouldn't.
Okay.
And somebody with integrity doesn't break their promises.
Is it to show that you are at a level within your organisations that you would suddenly say the word?
Well, in the ceremony. So it's not within the organisation.
I see.
It's within the ceremony itself.
I see.
And the ceremonies, as I say, allow us to reflect on... well, shall I tell you about the ceremonies? Because people want to know what it is that we actually do. So let's talk about some of the things that we do. The first degree ceremony, there's 3 stages really in Masonry, and you will have heard the first, second, and
as in
degree.
Getting the 3rd degree, that's where it came from, isn't it?
So the first one really is a representation of birth. It tells us that we all come into the world as equals. So at the moment of born, you and I were naked little chaps between our mother's legs, and we're exactly the same. And then as life goes on, our circumstances change. One of us will be doing better than the other one. The one who's doing better has a responsibility to help those who are less fortunate themselves. The second degree ceremony, that talks about getting the most out of life. It talks about improving yourself through education to become a better person. And the third degree ceremony is all about your death. So you know that this life that you've got is coming to an end.
Right.
So you better make the most of it whilst you're here.
Right.
So it gives you an extra dimension. So whatever I do in the rest of my life,
Yeah.
I've got this sort of Masonic dimension which makes me think about being a better person, the sorts of things that I do, not breaking my promises by saying things that I promised I wouldn't say,
Yeah.
which is a trivial thing. You're right, I am an intelligent man, why can't I say it?
Yes, I'm glad you accept that, because you sort of had me until then in a way. But anyway, we must part that. You've made a point, and I respect that. But why do we need to put a rope around a putative Mason's neck?
Well, everything in Masonry is symbolic.
Yeah.
So
Is that you have to keep silence?
I'll talk to the noose in a second, if I may.
Okay.
But a different example would be the all-seeing eye. You've seen the all-seeing eye on the American banknotes.
Yes, and I wasn't going to ask you how that happened, because you're not that. You didn't design the dollar bill.
You know, well, the American Constitution was based on Freemasonry. It's the democratic principles of what happens in a Masonic lodge which actually formed that Constitution,
I see.
and the people who formed it were Freemasons.
I see.
But the all-seeing eye is a symbol, and it reminds us that there's something greater than ourselves watching us. And if there's something greater than ourselves watching us, we have to behave ourselves, because we have to give an account of ourselves to that
Yeah.
thing at the end of our life.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the noose.
Yes,
Again, the
okay.
noose has symbology, if you like, in Freemasonry. The first degree ceremony, as I said, is a representation of birth. The noose represents an umbilical cord.
So are they all held on the same night, 1, 2, and 3, or is there a
No.
time?
So I would I
grade
did
up.
mine sort of each year. I think.
see.
So I did one
Sorry,
a year.
when you
or
go, so let's come back to
So
the noose,
yeah, the noose is a symbol of the umbilical cord. Another set of things that we have in our lodge is a rough stone
Why
and
don't
a
you put
smooth
it around
stone.
your waist if it's an umbilical cord? The
Well-
reality is you have to keep silence at certain times, don't you? It is an inherent threat that you don't testify against a fellow Mason because they'll put a noose around your neck.
No, that's absolute nonsense.
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
look, we've got people from all different walks of life, serious people. We've got city directors, we've got trade union leaders, people from all different bits of the political spectrum, all different races, all different classes. These are serious people. If it was quite as ridiculous as people like to make out, you serious people wouldn't join it. And they do, and they get an enormous amount out of it.
You say you want to make people better. Define better.
Better as in adding a moral dimension to everything that they do. When they've got a choice in front of them, they don't just take the easy thing to do. They think about what's the right
Who's
thing to
deciding
do.
what's moral and what's not moral?
Well, the one thing that you have to do, no, absolutely not. The one thing that you have to do and have to believe in to be a Freemason is a God. And
Yes,
if you
I was
look
coming to that,
and if you look back, to Rudyard Kipling's day, even in the toxic racial melting pot of the Indian Raj, he was initiated into a lodge which had Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and Christians all sitting together, all different castes, all different classes, sitting together, meeting as equals, and then they would go off and they would dine as equals. So even in that extraordinary period of history, people who were completely different were able to come together and celebrate their common humanity. And we've been doing that for hundreds of years, and we're still doing it now.
So an atheist can't become a Freemason?
Absolutely not. And that goes back to when you ask me the question about who decides what's right and wrong. What's right for me is according to my faith as a Christian. What's right for a Muslim is according to their faith. We're not a religious organisation, but we do require that you believe in a higher being or a God. And that's because you have to hold yourself morally accountable to something greater than yourself.
Last of the rigorous research that's come from the online world, Masons will never testify truthfully against each other.
Absolute nonsense. In our first degree ceremony, we are read something called the charge after initiation. We're going to put bits of that up on our website so that people can actually see what it says. But the first thing that you must promise is that you must never disobey the laws of the land in which that you live, and you must uphold the social and moral
But if
code.
you do, can I testify against you? If I'm not a Mason, I hasten to add, but I'm not prohibited from saying, well, yes, I did see the doctor do X and Y on
Yeah.
their estates.
Absolutely. So
Right,
you
okay.
have to hold yourself to truth, to integrity. So
Right.
if we have a member who misbehaves, anything which is to do with fraud, anything which is to do with dishonesty, any
Yes.
conviction that they are expelled from the organisation. We do not take people if they have criminal records. We do not want these people in our organisation. I represent 200,000 members as I sit here talking to you, and for a very long time those 200,000 members have been tarred with a pretty disgraceful
They
brush
have,
owing
yes.
to the behaviour of a very small minority. And I think it's time to say enough enough is enough.
Well, the same can be said of radio presenters. Lastly, I know that in this country there are people such as the Duke of Edinburgh, and I think the Duke of Kent is like the leader or the grand leader or whatever. Have there been any prime ministers who've been Masons? Have there been any presidents who've been Masons? US presidents?
US presidents, certainly. I'm not sure about British prime ministers, but on our website, again, I think we've got 27 pages full of famous people who have been Freemasons. Winston Churchill, Rudyard Kipling, huge numbers of people.
And in the US?
And in the US, yes, I can't...
A lot of presidents have.
I believe so, but as I said, the